Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am really excited today to be having a conversation about state privacy law with Representative Monique Priestley. She is a representative in the Vermont Legislature, and Vermont has had a really interesting history with privacy law that's ongoing. I also just want to begin and do something very self-indulgent. I just got the copy of my new book. They finally sent these out, so now it's finally out in print. So I'm really excited to finally have this out. And this book is about privacy law and the future of privacy law, which is the subject of our conversation. How do we protect privacy in light of all of the changing technologies that we're dealing with today, especially AI? I have been following the state legislation for a very long time. It's been very interesting to see that since 2018, with California, states have been passing privacy laws and trying to address the situation. And we've seen quite a number, and I've been making whiteboards, little one-page visual summaries of the various privacy laws out there. And I've done one for every state that has come along to do a privacy law. I created one of these for my training company that would sum up the laws. And so last year, I was very excited when I saw that Vermont had passed a privacy law, which Representative Priestley had sponsored, and I was really excited. And so I created a whiteboard for the Vermont privacy law. Unfortunately, what I thought it was, a sure bet because it passed overwhelmingly. I thought a sure bet that this is going to be the law. And I just thought, okay, I didn't really follow up to see, was it signed? Well, in fact, it was not. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the kind of preview before we get to what's going on now. A little bit about what happened last time with the privacy law. Tell me a bit about the law that you had proposed and gotten through and passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan support, and then what happened to it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'm gonna reach out for an autographed copy of a Vermont whiteboard at the end of this term. I hope. um, so yeah, so I introduced at the first year of my first term. So I'm in my third year of my first year of my second term. We had gone over in House Commerce and Economic Development a privacy bill. By the end of the first year, it really wasn't in a condition that we felt comfortable passing it out. So we started over again. My chair asked that we start with Connecticut as a base. So in that, I had reached out to Senator James Maroney to basically just find, as a new legislator, I was like, make me feel more confident about copying your bill. This seems like a very weird kind of legislative process for me to just be copying people's bills and then trying to get them passed without kind of like digging in. So I asked kind of like how comfortable he was with the bill when it passed out, what changes he would have made, who he talked to, how he kind of like went through the process. And then I started going through my own process with like his introductions, and then started reaching out to many people across the spectrum. So industry, academics, civil society, all of the people, and that continues to grow. And what I ended up introducing was, as really in collaboration with other state legislators, to try to, everybody's introducing a framework, but then everybody has different needs for their own states, but also different lobbying pressures and different, influences that might affect their bills. And so all of us were kind of talking about not only the things we were seeing and being asked to do or told to do, but also like how the goals that everybody individually had, and then together as a collective. So a lot of that was trying to move the needle on what was included in definitions like biometric data, sensitive data. It was things like, how do you define targeted advertising so it's more clear but also protective. And then as far like data minimization and trying to really slow the amount of information that is being collected, and make it so that it's only what's necessary to complete a business rule, and then make it more, protective for people. There was a number of other things, but then the most controversial, of course, was the inclusion of a private right of action, which I included. I actually didn't know. Like, I thought we were going to have to drop it a lot sooner than I thought, almost immediately. And it was something that the more that I learned, the more that my chair learned, the more that I realized and he realized in general that that was in critical components that we needed to keep, and that there's a reason that it's the most lobbied kind of like poison pill piece of a bill, because it's also the thing that will actually have teeth and hold people accountable. So that is something. What happened is we got it out of our committee unanimously with the private right of action and strong enforcement mechanisms and just strong provisions. And then it went to the Senate. They did a strike all, and replaced it with basically an industry bill. We got it back. We did a strike all and replaced it again, and it went back and forth. And then the Senate was running out the clock on us being able to go to conference committee, and they were also running out the clock on getting the bill moving at all. So what we did is we had age appropriate design code, which I had a companion bill on the House side. So the Senate moved their age appropriate design code bill. We had it on the House side. We started strike-alling, I don't know if it's a word, but the kids bill to add privacy into it and make it a combined bill. And then the Senate, realized that they needed to, if they wanted to keep that a standalone bill, then they needed to move the privacy bill. So they moved that, but again, running out the clock, sending it to multiple committees. We ended up having kind of a forced negotiation, because we had received a call. My chair received a call the night before kind of the one of the votes, and they said, the deal was basically we'll adjust the House version, so the strong version, with additional kind of like guardrails on the PRA. So it's like a sunset, delayed effectiveness, that kind of stuff. And so he's like, great. But then they ended up, their final strike all had been the industry bill plus the PRA. So that's when we went into the kind of the forced behind closed doors negotiation. And we ended up with the House version with the agreed upon negotiation points around the PRA. It passed the House unanimously. It passed the Senate on a voice vote in favor. It got vetoed by the governor. It got overridden in the House. It was the strongest veto override in the House. And then the night before the veto override for the House and Senate, I got a call from lobbyists that said that they had 6 of our Democratic senators rolled to vote against the bill unless I took out the PRA. I said no, and so the Senate sustained the override of the governor. Yeah, I guess that's it.
There's a lot there, and there's a lot I want to dive into. In particular, I guess one thing I do want to mention, and I really liked about the bill, was were the data minimization requirement and the private right of action. I've long been a proponent of both of these things. I think the data minimization is really necessary to give more heft and meaning to a privacy law. If it's just whatever a company just says in its policy, and then it just is held to what it says, it can just say whatever it wants and then do whatever it wants. So it doesn't really have much real meaningful limitation without the data minimization. And then without the private right of action, the problem is that the enforcement just is not there. I mean, a lot of state agencies just don't enforce enough. and they just don't have the resources to enforce. And the private right
Right.
of action essentially allows, like I said, a privatization of enforcement. So in a way, industry should love it. It's privatization. Um, but I think it has some issues. But I think one thing that I wanted to emphasize, and one thing I really like about your law, was that it was a lot of the state laws got into this rut of copy and paste. You had the California law, and then you had Virginia come along, which was largely an industry rewrite of California. So they kind of took California and like how they watered it down and produced the Virginia model, the Virginia bill. And then that really started to take off. And if you look at a lot of the state laws, they're basically Virginia with maybe a few variations, but there's a couple different variants. But the laws weren't really doing that much or moving the needle that much. So, when another state came on and they did the law, it was not that big of a deal. Like, it didn't really change the landscape for privacy. If we're looking at states as the laboratories of democracy, they're not really doing much experimentation or invention. They're
Yeah.
literally doing a cut and paste. So I like the fact that you were trying to do something different in the law, which is probably why you got the lobbying pushback. And I'm curious to learn a little bit more about the nature of that that pushback. What was that like? Are you still seeing that now? And then what are the ways in which, like, how influential are the lobbyists? And what can we learn about just the general practice and how they interact with a legislature?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So it's when I was on interviews when I first became a legislator, and I came in and I knew quite a few of the lobbyists. I knew in general, just people in the building. And I was like, lobbyists are great. I love them. And they're so helpful because we don't have staff and we don't have offices and we don't have all that stuff. And while, yes, there are like great, I guess it's a spectrum. I've realized now that there's more of a spectrum of kind of the influence, I guess. And also it is more of, I guess, recognizing it as more of a tool, for better or worse, and to both experiment with what pushback is and what arguments are, but also to help try to like leverage and get things across. So I guess I've recognized more of the sphere of what that is. And it was really intense for people who have been in the building for like 40 years. They said it was the most intense lobbying they've ever seen. We did some quick kind of checks of the lobbyist database, and at least $1 million was spent trying to kill the privacy bill last year, from a variety of different sources. And actually, way more. There was more. The number of lobbyists against the bill was actually more than I figured. And I mean, it's super helpful because, one, like, I took a meeting with every single person, whether lobbyist or not, just across the spectrum. Anybody who wanted to talk about the bill, I sat down and took time with them, and that was something that I was told over and over was a unique thing that people had not seen. I wanted to have conversations again because I didn't want to copy and paste. I wanted to have a thorough understanding myself of what was in the bill, of the arguments against the bill, about the potential impacts of the bill, but also the need for the bill. So across the spectrum, like, having those conversations was really helpful. What I kind of have learned along the way is that there's a wide spectrum again of lobbyists themselves, as far as local lobbyists they're trying to handle a lot of issues. They're juggling a ton of stuff. So in some cases they weren't, I feel for them because they, in a lot of cases, weren't able to keep up with the number of bills they had to keep up with last year, especially with just big issues we were dealing with. At the same time, it also is in the same vein as a legislator. It's really hard to have expertise in any given area. So you might have people who are trying to, represent a local school food group or something, plus a big social media company, plus some kind of like data broker, plus the local hospital or something or nonprofit. So they have to try to navigate that. So I understand that. But at the same time, when you're trying to have a real conversation where you're trying to actually dig into the policy, the functionality, when you're trying to understand the actual legal language, for me, like I redlined all of my changes myself, with learning from people and like knowing what to do there. And then of course all of it went to the legislative council, but I wanted to be able to understand the words that I was putting on the page, and how they could impact, and also to recognize things like single commas or single words can completely alter a bill. So that was important. At the same time, when we're trying to have conversations with local lobbyists, they often know talking points, and they might not have the resources and knowledge to go further than that. So for me, that was frustrating when I was trying to actually go deeper. As an example, I spent what was going to be an hour the other day with somebody, 4 hours going into the nuances of de-identified data. And it was amazing, because I wanted to understand all of kind of as much as I could. So that's the level of what I want to do. So from now on, kind of like I realized learned from other state legislators that they often, if they're going to have like a local lobbyist trying to set up meetings with the client needs to be there. And hopefully like the client could be government affairs, and in some cases regional or national kind of level government affairs people, they have the expertise, and like that's who you need to have a conversation with. But often I feel like I actually want to be able to go to the level of talking to the engineers and talking to the privacy officers, inside and outside counsel. Like those conversations are really helpful. Even kind of customer support teams sometimes, depending on what it is. The lobbying itself, so that's last year, and actually last year it got really it got intense, but it also, in my mind, there was just it went beyond professionalism in a lot of ways, that had just kind of negative ramifications that lasted throughout the summer. I'll just phrase it like that. So that wasn't, I do not want to revisit how things got last year. And so this year, I would say people are, let's see, holding back. So we saw a lot of stonewalling at the end of last year, and I would say like we've gone into this year starting with stonewalling, which is interesting. Like we had people who said, if we started the bill on the House side this year, that their clients would refuse to meet with us, they would refuse to meet with us, and they would see us, they would fight the bill on the Senate. So I mean that led to politics that changed that dynamic. But one thing I did is that I asked my chair if I could take over an afternoon of testimony. And I had been reading articles about different lobbying efforts in different states against privacy bills. And so I ended up inviting Daniel Solove, Whitney Westerfield, Sarah Love, Maggie O'Neill, Colin Waukee. So wide spectrum of states, and then party representation and chamber representation. And just asked them, I just went through all of kind of the interaction types that I had, and asked if they were the same in every state. And we just went through war stories basically for 2 hours. And that's Tech Policy Press did an article about it. And it's also on my website. The advocates tend to call it their chicken soup for the privacy advocate's soul.
So roughly, I mean, are the lobbyists the more local or more national, or are you seeing a lot of the large tech companies or large data broker companies from nationwide kind of descend on your state, or is it more state interested folks, or a mixture?
Yeah, it's a super mix. It is a lot of course, like the main kind of game is the local lobbyists on the ground, but then their clients ask them to come, kind of facilitate meetings, to come in and to testify and that kind of stuff. So they'll have a mix of local lobbyists, regional and national lobbyists coming in. And then we also have a lot of like trade associations that end up speaking, and then smaller kind of astroturfy type sub groups of those. And we also saw a number of kind of astroturf campaigns on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, that kind of stuff that were happening. And there's a lot of, I have a small business, I have a nonprofit, so I'll also get a lot of the materials that are calling people to action, to get all angry and to come in and contact your representative, the governor. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff that still continues from national groups that are feeding that kind of like through the local trade groups, trade associations, and then riling up everybody on the ground here. So it's hard to combat that, because they probably have coverage of the entire state, and most of the people in it, to send direct messages.
How about on the other side? Are there civil society groups, nonprofit, privacy advocacy groups also lobbying, or not so much?
Yeah, there's definitely some lobbying for sure from civil society groups, and nonprofits, and it's good to have that spectrum. I think the thing that is different there, is that you might have, it's just interesting for me. I guess when I sometimes I will be told by like an industry group, that they don't have time for me, because their time is more valuable, than taking an hour to do a Zoom with me, and that might be a company that has hundreds of thousands of employees and are getting paid. I can't even comprehend how much money they must be getting paid per hour. And on the other side, I might have the lobbyists from civil society groups that might be 1 or 2 person teams or 12-person teams, or sometimes bigger. But they'll take a call at midnight if I need them to, to better understand a piece of a bill. And so it is a different dynamic. And yeah, yeah.
So I'm curious. Generally, in the kind of new effort, I presume you have now the private right of actions in there, the data minimizations in there. Despite the lobbyist efforts to, I think that those are the big targets, right? Um, are there kind of, where do things stand now? And what do you do when you get, like, kind of, what is the response like by you and others when the lobbyists kind of really start hammering something like the private right of action? Like, what's the uh, reaction and the impact of it?
Yeah, so the bill kind of as introduced by me to H208, included it, like a lot of lessons learned. So spent a lot of time adjusting the definition of targeted advertising, adding in some like clarity around first and third party advertising and first and third party data and contextual advertising, and then a number of definitions kind of were updated to match what other states had passed, and then also again trying to like move the needle either slightly further than where they were, or just to keep up with everybody else. There was a few little things about AI data, employment, that kind of stuff, data minimization, and also adding clarity to the data minimization piece, which actually could still use another line of clarity that got dropped in the legislative drafting piece that I'm going to fix. And then also broadens or narrowed, I would say, the private right of action. So at the end of last session, the private right of action focused on sensitive data, and it focused on data brokers and large data holders, which we defined as having processing the data of 100,000 Vermonters or more per year. And so it was hyper focused on that. This year broadened it to be violations of sensitive data, the processing kind of standards, discrimination, breaking the laws, that kind of stuff. But again, focused it on data brokers, large data holders, and then also added a threshold of 25 million in revenue. That so if you're below that, then you can't have the private right of action taken against you. Um, yeah, and yeah, I guess I don't know. That's where we're at.
Yeah,
uh,
and I guess I would say, like, on that front, it's an interesting compromise to put the limit on. My only concern with something like that would be, um, uh, will the enforcers typically want to go after the big ones too? So everyone wants to enforce against Meta, right? So everyone wants to enforce against the big names, and so that means if you're a kind of a smaller company, you kind of get away with it because you're not big enough to be enforced against. You fall under the thresholds of the law, or you then become too small. And I'm wondering, what can anything, is that just a problem that's kind of endemic to the law, or is there a way to address it? Because you obviously don't want smaller companies to have to fend off very expensive lawsuits. um, on the other hand, you don't want them to kind of be effectively not regulated because they're just too small to really get caught, or really to get the interest of an enforcer that has very limited enforcement. So they're going to go after the ones that have the most impact.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, the we also added a provision in there too, trying to like slow down frivolous. The I guess you had asked earlier, and I didn't answer as far as like pushback on the PRA. And the biggest one is like the biggest one we were trying to get at was slowing down the frivolous potential for frivolous lawsuits. And in there, there's kind of a step where a person needs to let the AG and the business know that they want to take suit. The AG at that point can actually jump in if they want to, like if they think it's a big enough thing, they can take that on. I do think, yeah, the 25 million does leave a gap, but this, if we are able to like get any of this through, then it's a starting point, and it's something that like we have to start somewhere. And if we, some that includes like a report back from the AG of what was reported and things like that. And so there's always room to evolve that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, that this might just be the starting point of the conversation, and I think we are seeing some states start to look back on their privacy laws and start to consider adding some things. I haven't
Yeah.
seen much in terms of states looking to add a private right of action, but some are starting, I think, to think about uh, data minimization. And I think over time, I think the private right of action argument will win, because I think that's going to be is the most effective. When you look at the state laws that are really really effective, like the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act, that has a very robust private right of action. And there are of course abuses of it and problems, but you can't say that law isn't taken seriously. It's taken incredibly seriously, and I challenge any other law to be as taken seriously as that law. Um, uh, I guess, yeah, and I guess part of the other, the lobbying too is a focus on the direction of the overall conversation of state privacy law. And I'm wondering, to what extent do you think Vermont is the focus of this larger conversation? Like, we don't want to see trends or things happen in the law. Until Maryland came and put the data minimization provision in the law, the laws had pretty much done the kind of Virginia-esque model and other models, but now that they put data minimization in, now we're starting to see that start to get interest and attract. Like, once one does it, the lemmings all start to follow. So I'm wondering too if part of the battle here is kind of for the not as much as Vermont, but also generally, like, what's the future of the law going to look like in other states? If you make it through with this, does that and then how do you see that in terms of what you're trying to do? Obviously, you legislate for your state, but what your state does have an impact on the overall conversation and direction of U.S. privacy law until we have a federal law.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that is the conversation. um, so when I started, I did, I mean, generally, I feel like people do not pay attention to what's happening in their state legislatures. They, when I was campaigning, people didn't know even who their Senate, like I'm in the House, but they didn't know who their senator was. And that's still like a broad theme. People are not paying attention. And so then also you kind of get this argument from people too that like, why get involved with anything that's like more of a could be a national thing or seems like it's not a kitchen table issue. And I realized, I think, two things. One is um, that that it is that Vermont can have an effect nationally, which is wild. I did not, because of the precedence piece. So although other states are, and everybody knows this, I think, which is why it's such a big fight. Um, while other states are not necessarily adding PRAs to their laws or trying to amend with it, conversations I've had with other legislators are like, we need someone to do it, and that's also why I held on as long as I did, because and that's the problem because as soon as someone tries to get something across, then everybody will try to do that. That's what we're doing with the definitions. That's what we're doing with kind of all the provisions, data minimization, and so that is the contentious piece. I think as far as when it comes to national issues, kitchen table thing, is that people expect either that they already have privacy protections because it's a constitutional right in a lot of ways, and that it's an American value of having privacy, and autonomy and freedom. And so people just assume that the state has them covered. The government has them protected. I don't think people feel that the same way maybe with recent news, but at least when I was starting to work on this. And then at the end, they might also, and this is probably maybe how people are starting to feel a little bit, is that it's out of control, and there isn't necessarily anything anybody can do about it. And what I, started kind of like focusing on this year is trying to make it, trying to get people to realize like how everything they do every day, they're being how they're interacted with by companies and how their data is being used and collected. And there was little things. So like people read my rebuttal documents or floor speeches, and then friends reported having gone to the car dealership, and then asked for a privacy policy and kind of caught the car dealership off guard because people don't typically ask for that, and they ended up being able to opt out, but I had to go to like the top manager in order. They had to go through several steps and wait for that to happen. Or I had a friend who had booked their family at a hotel in a city, and they realized that the only way they could access the hotel was with a biometric scan. And from reading and paying attention to the stuff I was doing last year, they're like, I know that I have no claim over my face or the faces of my family, so I'm not going to do that. So they actually switched hotels to just a human check-in. Um, and I think the other piece too is the kitchen table piece is that we can focus on housing, we can focus on workforce, we can focus on like education and healthcare and all of our massive issues we're trying to deal with. But we can build as much housing as we want. We can, do as many jobs put as many jobs out there as we can, and have capital and funding for entrepreneurs. But if we are not reining in the amount of data that is being collected on people, and then that is being fed into systems that can, automate decisions or, you know, using artificial intelligence to start crafting mechanisms um, to make decisions without a human intervention, then it doesn't matter how much housing we have if people can't get into it or are priced out of it or dropped, like the medical piece, if they're dropped from their insurance or can't get it because of one little data piece, they might not have to be right in their records, or being declined for jobs or being fired from jobs or whatever. So all of the major issues that we are trying to work on are, we have to look at the infrastructure behind that, the digital infrastructure behind all of that.
So I wonder to what extent you think there's any effect of the Trump 2.0 administration on the state legislative process. I mean, I recently wrote a piece arguing that, in light of, some of the stated goals of the administration and the things the administration was trying to do, that there could be a new reason or impetus for states to strengthen their privacy laws or do more to restrict the data that the federal government might be able to get its hands on. And I'm wondering to what extent, and also too, like the state laws, especially privacy laws, could be a place of resistance to those who
Hmm.
want to oppose what the administration's doing. And I'm wondering if you're seeing any of that. If the election changed the context or the desire for state legislation in one way or the other, if it strengthened it, had no effect, or had an effect of weakening the effort. I'm curious, like, what was the impact, if any, of what's going on at the federal level?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think it's had a number of different effects which are interesting. And one is that, like, for one, for me, I was like, is it tone deaf to keep working on data privacy when we have like bigger issues? But at the same, what you said, as far as like being in a state legislature, it is also a potential area that we can step up to try to protect people. And so when it comes to certain provisions like consumer health data and protecting just certain sensitive data in general, that is something that I think people realize there's a need for, because I think people are realizing what that can be used again, how that can be used against them for certain things in this climate. And also, I think a lot of the like federal firing has brought up the idea of employee protections, which I think only California has employee protections as far as the data covers those. And then also the biggest one is that people are like, you should use what's happening at the federal level to, push the privacy bill. And I'm like, yeah, except for we exempt all states, local, and federal government from having to do any of this. So I could say that, but that doesn't feel like that feels a little misleading, because it won't actually protect from that. So I I don't know at what point there's political give to have the governments covered. I don't know if we're there yet. Maybe we are. I guess I haven't had those conversations to push that yet. We will for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's something that we're definitely talking about at the state house level is, what do we do to either combat or strengthen, kind of put walls in place as far as protecting Vermonters from everything that's going on. And that's no different than like my first term. There was a lot of new justice turnover, and so I thought it was crazy. Like, it was very fascinating. But within the first like couple weeks, we did bill after bill after bill, and it was really just shield bills, federal shield bills to protect people who were seeking gender affirming care, abortion access, that kind of stuff. So I think this time is no different. I think we do need to think about these as like shield bills of type.
Yeah, because I think it's implicated, and there's generally a bunch of issues here. One is the fact that these laws are exempting governments and a lot of times nonprofits from their scope, and actually are limited to just larger types of businesses. And you contrast that with the GDPR, which applies to everyone: government, nonprofit, large business, small business. And it's kind of nice to know, okay, there's kind of like, here is this kind of consistent level of protections that people have. And, it doesn't matter if, everyone's subject to the same rules, which I think is generally like a good thing. I mean, I wish, campaigns were subjected to these rules, because they seem to say, oh, we're just going to ignore, all the privacy best practices when it comes to texting or emailing and everything else. And I think, the private sector industry is much, much better than the political sphere on following privacy rules. So I do think it's great that, it'd be great to have the laws do this. I don't think we're there yet here in the United States, because we have all these exemptions. And then there's the issue of, what could be done with, you know, various types of federal endeavors that states want to push back on. I think the biggest one is with, the attempts to, uh, you know, you know, restrict reproductive freedom and those types of things. But there, it's sort of there's law enforcement access, but then it goes to the data minimization point, right? That if the data is not being collected and maintained, or maintain or have to be purged after a certain period of time, that does limit the ability of the government to gather this data. So it's and also inferences can be made from data. So you don't need actual indications that someone's pregnant. There's inferences that algorithms can make from other data, just from innocuous purchases, that could then
Right.
give rise to that. So in essence, the law can address those issues and can limit that, which then would limit and protect against federal government or other states from finding out this information. I think it's also too awakening people to the consequences of their data being held by these companies. Although I kind of think people are already there. I think if you look at polls, people are very concerned. I think the
Yeah.
challenge is that they don't fully know exactly how it works, but they kind of want to be protected. That's very
Yeah.
cool. In terms of, I'd like to kind of get to a little bit more and dive into the private right of action, since that's like the most controversial piece of it all.
Sure.
Uh, and you made a choice. Let's go for it. Let's do something different. Let's get this going. It probably, you think the law would have passed if it didn't have that? Is
Oh
that
yeah,
hang
it would have for sure. Yeah.
And so in the battle now, like you think that with this limit, it will go through? You think there's a risk of another veto, or do you think that with this limit, it has a chance?
So I think a lot of this is going to be timing, and I also don't necessarily want to give away any of
Yeah,
the
okay.
strategy. So I'm going to dance around this one a little bit, to be honest. Um, but I mean, so right now we have it, and honestly, where things are at, if people are paying attention to what's going on, so I introduced H208. The Senate introduced an exact copy of that, S71. They did a strike all the other day to replace it with the kind of the guts of S93, which is an industry bill. And so that is the vehicle that's like moving right now. So that vehicle right now, not only does it not have a private right of action, but it has a bunch of clauses in there that says something to the effect of like nothing in this act should be seen as making people eligible to access the unfair and deceptive acts kind of consumer protection language that's been on the books for decades. So that's not just no PRA. That is like a intentional disconnection from people's given and long running Consumer Protection Act protections. So it passed with that. And so obviously the Senate's going to do what it's going to do. They still have a vote to get it out. But on the House side, we would aim to make things stronger and be able to go to a conference and negotiate to the middle, basically.
Yeah.
Um,
So the Senate seems less, I guess, privacy friendly than the House is. Is that?
I mean, I think a lot of ways it's I don't they understand. I think a lot of them understand privacy and want to see it pass. I think the problem is it is a super technical bill. It's involved. We have more time. We have a me who's running around outside of committee. I've put in more than a full time job on just these privacy bills in the last year. There's no resource and availability on the Senate to do that. They have half a day of testimony. They have two committees a day that they go to. Whereas the House, we can take more testimony, we can dive in. So I want to believe that they do want strong privacy protections. and the full kind of like scope of what that actually means when it gets to the legalese is like a different story.
Yeah.
And
It's
they're
really,
heavily lobbied. Like I told you, like the lobbyists said they would. Nobody was going to talk to us on the House side. They basically said, good luck, and we'll see you on the Senate. We'll go fight it in the Senate and like get it watered down. So like the Senate also just faces so much more kind of like intense lobbying pressure as well. I mean, and we get it really bad. So I can't even imagine really.
yeah. And what you have some other privacy bills. In fact, there's the general consumer. We've been talking about the general consumer privacy law, the one that about 20 states have, that kind of covers a broad array of types of data, involving consumers. But we're also seeing in states subject specific privacy laws. These are biometric information privacy laws, health privacy laws, children's data laws, and other laws, which I think is also another interesting development. And some of these laws are different, and they're not in the same model as the consumer privacy law, but they deal with a more narrow range of information. And what other laws are you involved with?
More than I planned. So I guess I got seen as a person who will do things. So I planned on doing like three bills, which was 121 basically uh, ended up at three chapters at the end of last year as one bill. So comprehensive data privacy, which included consumer health data and minor protections. Age appropriate design code was the second chapter of that, and then updates to our data breach kind of notification laws. So that was a different. So my plan was to introduce those three, and then more or less two AI kind of like bills reintroducing from last year. That turned into 30 bills, I think, a mix of what I was working on, and then a mix of groups wanting somebody to sponsor things. Like I had eighth graders who wanted me to sponsor a food safety act. So there's a lot of that. But when it comes to the privacy bill, so it's those three from what was H121 of last year. I have Daniel's bill, so non-disclosure of personal data for judges and public safety, and a few other groups of people that are facing an increased rate of doxing and harassment, and even and murder in some cases. And so that's one. And then I have some specific ones that are both introduced and coming, which is trying to get into business and advertising technology transparency of what is being collected and what is being profited off of. I'm going to work on a de-identified kind of like data specific focused bill. That will both be, I think, kind of what industry, some nice things for industry as far as providing clarity. But also prohibition on re-identifying de-identified information. So it's also something that I know civil society will probably appreciate. And then with everything that's going on with certain companies' devices listening to us and that blowing up in the news, I have an interest in doing like a device specific privacy policy as well.
Wow. So on the Daniels law, one little thing. I mean, I love the concept of Daniels law. I would love for a law to be broad, so that it would cover everybody, anyone who's under a threat.
Definitely.
If they're a stalking victim, if they're uh, a doctor doing abortions, if they're even if these days, if you're a meteorologist, you can be threatened, or someone who promotes vaccines, or who even says that there's a virus out there. It could be anybody who could be come under attack, and even on the other side. I mean, there's. So I hope that the Daniels laws do take a direction that would be a little bit broader, that can kind of cover anyone who is under a legitimate threat, to get their protection, not just judges, but that would be that would be nice if a bill would do that. And I think it would be a bipartisan interest, because I do think, we have threats, that cut across the political spectrum. Um,
The
uh,
the yeah, so I mean, so the Daniels Law piece for me, it was something that I wasn't sure whether I wanted to introduce it. It was something I learned about while kind of like digging into articles last year about what was happening in other states and to other legislators when it comes to lobbying and pressures to kill kind of like privacy bills. The really kind of like the thing I want to do, there's a number of things that I want to do with the Daniels Law. What one is definitely protect people who are the most perhaps like likely to get really severe kind of like threats to themselves and to their heart, to their families, and that's public safety, courts, judges, that kind of.
I think you just froze up for a second. I'm hoping that you will unfreeze. So I don't know what happened on your end.
Nope. Are we back?
Oh, you're back. Yes, good,
Am I
good.
back?
Uh,
Okay. Yes.
so
Sorry.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
you
got
say
your
how it's
point in.
Wi-Fi.
So that was good. You just finished with Daniel's Law. Trying to get in at least the
Oh,
kind of
okay.
initial version of it. Um, I also want to chat briefly about the design code law, children's privacy laws. We're seeing a lot of pushback on the First Amendment implications of these laws. I think that there are, what's I think unfortunate about the current landscape of the First Amendment challenges and the cases that I'm seeing is that I think there are some real legitimate First Amendment interests here, and really, some of the laws have provisions that are troubling under the First Amendment. But there's also, I think, unfortunately, we have some courts and arguments being made on the other, arguments and courts making decisions that are kind of taking the First Amendment in, I think, rather extreme directions that ultimately, like, basically, breathing is a First Amendment thing, and pretty much anything is speech, like everything. Um, uh, so I'm concerned, like, how are you navigating that landscape, and how much does in the legislative process do you look to kind of what's going on in the First Amendment, and then how do you deal with the fact that, like, the First Amendment now seems to be a little bit of a, it's always been a moving target, but now it seems to be this war between two dueling versions of the First Amendment. One that seems like there's a reasonable version, and there's like the First Amendment is like the universe, and covers making a noise.
Yeah, so I mean, so as far as looking to what's going on in other states, I mean, the thing that happened with the age appropriate design code is um, at the end of last session when I had to combine them politically to get them into one vehicle, I spent 3 full days with legislative council basically trying to just harmonize, and we moved all of the data privacy kind of elements over to the comprehensive data privacy bill. So that I feel good about, the really worrying aspects of privacy abuses for kids in that comprehensive piece. And so that piece is, I feel like, covered once we get that passed. And then when it comes to kind of the general, what ended up being the age appropriate design code, it was really meant to be like a product safety bill. Like, let's look at addictive features, let's look at dark patterns, like that kind of stuff. And over the summer, was definitely, as working with like legislative council, was constantly kind of looking at what was happening in cases kind of around the country. And this is where, it was really helpful to be able to reach out to like academics, civil society, and just get, and think tanks, and get technical assistance on, like, I just saw that this, I just, every time a news article would come out, I'd be like, okay, it looks like this state is like fighting this thing. Can you guys tell me what this actually means? And then also they knew what was in the age appropriate design code. So I'd be like, can you please tell me how this applies to that? And then how I might work around, what are the things I need to think about and work on with legislative council in order to avoid the same types of arguments in ours. And so that's a constant process, even until was right when I think Maryland case had just like happened, and that like that night I think I was trying to pass out kids code, and so was still making changes, and again, so it actually passed in the Senate, out of that chamber. So the copy of my, I can't remember the number right now, but H211 maybe, or 210. And so S69 was a copy of that one. And so that's coming back to us. So, and it actually, they made very little changes. So the changes, if there's going to be any changes that I do try to push for, then it would be around like trying to further strengthen from lessons learned with California.
So I want to thank you so much for joining us. I'm really eager to see how this legislative battle unfolds. I'm eager to see my revive. I discontinued this. I can revive it finally. I have all the illustrations. I'll have to change some things obviously because the new law will be different in some ways. But I'm hoping that there's a private right of action here. I'm hoping I can keep that. So very eager to, so that's the incentive. You pass the law, you get a whiteboard. And that should be enough of an influence to defeat all these lobbyists.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Lobbyists are stopping the whiteboard. That should be enough. But yeah, I'm really eager to see how this unfolds and how the development of the state privacy laws unfolds. There's always the wild card of what will the federal government do? Will they step in and do a preemptive
Right.
law? That conversation has been had for I don't know how long now. I've had this conversation, and my general thing is don't hold your breath. I wouldn't bet money on Congress. I wouldn't bet money on Congress changing a light bulb. But I don't think that privacy. I doubt that. Every now and then they always talk it, and they kind of it's Charlie Brown in the football. There's always like oh yeah, they might do it, but I think it's unlikely. But there's always that in the room. There's always that the elephant in the room of will there be a federal law that preempts anything? I think unlikely. So I think we're going to see the states continue on their march, continue to do things. My hope is that states will try different things, and we'll see what happens. Some with laws, you kind of have to try new things, and I have my thoughts of what might work, but what really matters is ultimately what happens on the ground when the law is actually passed. And so it's worth giving something a try too, and seeing if it works rather than giving up before you even start. So I do appreciate your efforts to try to do something a little new with privacy law. I think this is going to be a trend. I think that other states are going to start jumping in. I think when they see that their laws are not moving the needle that much, and people are still very concerned, and I think are going to grow even more concerned over time, especially with AI, and the increasing use of data for AI. So that's what I think is going to happen. So I think you're on the front lines of what is going to be a shift or a pivot in state law. I hope we'll see what happens, but that's where I think things are probably going to go.
Yeah.
So anyway, I look forward to checking in later. I'll be very curious to see how this happens, and hopefully later this year I'll be able to dust off this whiteboard and finally re-release it, and this time the law will be passed and signed, or somehow make it through, or an override, or whatever it might be. But hopefully this year will be the charm, and the law will make it through. So good luck.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Can I just add a call out for any other legislators who are watching this and or anybody who wants to get involved? My inbox is always open. I would love from any of the spectrum of people. It makes it better when there's more voices and involved. And I look forward to reading your book. So thanks for having me.
Thanks.